Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about Fatal North, Murder and Survival on the First North Pole Expedition by Bruce Henderson. I read it on my Kindle. And I started with another book first. I just started it now because I finished the book that I'm currently reviewing in this video. I was reading Hampton's Sides in the Kingdom of Ice. Yes, I think that's right. Well, we'll find out in the future review. And in that review, or in that book, that reading, which was talking about the USS Jeannette and a failed polar expedition, I read about an earlier expedition, the USS Polaris. And I was like, oh, shoot. I need to read that one because that one starts in 1871 and ends in 1873. I gotta read that. So I did. I got it and I read it because that's what this is about. So I am going to read these two books back to back. I'm already jumping back into In the Kingdom of Ice. And hopefully I won't get them too confused. But let me just go over what Fatal North is about because it's very interesting. Very interesting. This was the first attempt at going to the North Pole for a U.S. ship. And it was a failure. This was really the brainchild of, I think, George Hall. Right? Captain Hall, who was really an explorer, an adventurer, and he went to the Arctic, and he really sought out a backer for this exploration. And his backer, he had multiple backers. Grinnell was a backer. Who was this big supportive person behind it? None other than President U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, and his Secretary of the Navy. But he needed to have a crew. And his crew, his officers, came from people that would know the North Water, the area near Greenland, that they were going to use the transit to the North Pole. They were also going to have scientists. They were going to look at different measurements and really keep track of what they find, flora, fauna, whatever. So you had a scientist contingent. You had whalers that knew the area that were signed on as officers. And you had this kind of weird bifurcated command system in the event that Hall died. I hope he doesn't. He did. He did die. And he died after drinking coffee. And there was some rumor that he was poisoned because just from the beginning of this ship, which started out as the USS Periwinkle, which has got to be one of the worst names for a U.S. warship I've ever heard, rechristened the USS Polaris, much better. The Periwinkle was part of the Civil War, was one of the flotilla ships out of, I think it was in the the Washington Naval Shipyard. And so rechristened the Polaris. The officers were a mix. Most of the crew was actually foreign. Most of the crew was German. And there was some English, English, Danish, Swede, but the rest were mostly German, including the lead scientific officer on the expedition. And they already had issues when they were leaving Canada, and it got worse and worse and worse. Now, some of the issues were the people that were picked for different leadership positions were not great. The second in command had a drinking problem when Hall died. He continued to have a drinking problem. There were also run-ins with the doctor who was also the lead scientist for the expedition. And there was this constant push and pull between the desire to go to the North Pole, which was really the primary reason for this expedition, and the scientific side of it, really documenting everything. And that really was the main problem at the beginning. And eventually, when they were getting close to the ice, and Hall and some of the others left on a sledge run for a couple days. When he came back, he was perfectly healthy, doing well. Went in, got a drink of coffee, and within 30 minutes or less, he was coughing and sick, felt really poor intestinal issues. The doctor was called for. He immediately thought, I think I've been poisoned, because he was perfectly fine before that. Got worse and worse and worse. Eventually he said, they're trying to kill me. He was kind of delirious. He decided that the doctor should not approach him. He started getting better, and then he got worse and he died. That was the beginning of, I guess there was already issues, but that was really when things really started to go downhill. And then there were divisions in the ship, and by the person who came in after, who was really probably the preferred second in command, but he had taken another job beforehand and came in late. There were divisions between the Germans and the non-Germans, and the rest of the story is basically those conflicts, which eventually led to the ship heading south. They already lost their captain. The second in command, who was now the captain, didn't have the heart or the bravery to go north. He really wanted to just pocket the money and head south. He was also drunk a lot. And on their way south, they got stuck in the ice. And they got trapped in the ice. Eventually, they got free. And they moved off to an area with some lee from a giant iceberg. When that started to fall apart, they headed south more, got stuck in ice, and then the ice broke, and they thought that the ship was going to founder, so they started throwing things overboard. 19 people got off the ship. A big piece of ice broke off. Those 19 people were separated from the ship. It looked like the ship might be sinking. It was in a storm. Next day, the people are still on that ice floe. They can't find the ship, but they're looking for it. Well, they decide, we better get to the most central part of this ice floe and create some igloos, structures for us to survive. They had some of their gear, but the big benefit to them was that they had the native Eskimos, Inuits. I think they're Eskimos. They said that. Greenland Eskimos or something like that. Greenland Inuits, whatever they are called. They were the best fishing folks around, hunters. Their families were there, 2 kids, including a 2-month-old that Hannah, the wife, had while they were out providing translation services and hunting and fishing. This group had further splits between the Germans and everyone else. And it got worse and worse and worse. They were trapped on the ice. It wasn't moving. They were secure in some way, but they needed food. Luckily, the hunters were able to bag different seals, sometimes a bear. But even that got tough after a while, and they really started to feel the pangs of hunger and starvation. They also knew that eventually that ice floe was going to break up. And they had 2 boats from the ship, the Polaris, which they had with them. One of them they destroyed for wood, for fire. And the other one they kept, which was good, because they eventually had to leave that ice floe, went to another ice floe. On that ice floe, they floated for a while, and then that started to break up too. And they fortunately right at the end, they knew that they were further south, and one of the natives went out in his kayak, flagged down a passing whaler, and they were picked up. All 19, nobody died from that group, and they were taken back to Canada and then taken down, to, I think, to Newfoundland, and then they were taken down to Washington, D.C., where they gave statements because there was going to be a whole investigation into what happened with this failed expedition. Why did the captain die? As this was happening, it was determined that while there's still 14 people left from the ship, from the Polaris, they don't know if the Polaris survived. They had an idea of where they may have seen it. So the second in command joined two ships. One was the Tigris, which was the one that saved them, the whaling ship. It was purchased for $60,000 by the U.S. Navy with the option... It was purchased for $60,000 by the U.S. Navy with the option of the sealing or whaling company, to purchase it back for $40,000. They make $20,000 after the rescue attempt. So the Tigris, and also the, I think it's Wineta or something like that, which is on that ship was George DeLong, who's going to show up in the next book. That's why I was following him, and then found out that he was part of this rescue, and I wanted to read about that rescue first. So they go up, look for the Polaris. They can't find it. They find a settlement that looks like it had been evacuated. It turns out that there were some Eskimos there. The Eskimos are like, hey, there were people here, and they went this way, and they left us their ship, but the ship eventually broke loose and sank, the Polaris. So the Polaris sank. The rest of that crew, with two boats that they kind of built, were heading south. They got picked up by a Scottish whaling ship that eventually went back to Dundee, Scotland, and they were brought back to the U.S. on a steamer, which was paid for by the U.S. government. And there they also gave their statements on what happened. And eventually they were cleared by the U.S. Navy. It was determined that the doctor acted correctly in what he was doing for Captain Hall, and that there were other people that were probably useless, like the drunk captain, but that there was no suspected murder. And now the rest of the story. Because in 1968, a crew went to the location where Captain Hall was buried in Greenland, exhumed the body after getting permission from the Danish government, exhumed the body, took samples, brought them back to the United States and Canada, tested them, and found out that there were high levels of arsenic. And the way that they were able to detect it and determined that based off of the growth rate for fingernails and hair, that Captain Hall was exposed to arsenic in the final 2 weeks of his life. He was being poisoned slowly, and because he had such a high constitution, he didn't die sooner. But it was the arsenic in his system, likely done by the doctor, the German doctor Besset or something like that. He's the one that probably did it. And they proved that 100 years later, 150 whatever years later, 100 years later, about 100 years later. Wow. It was like murder mystery, true, with a disaster story layered onto it that was maritime and nautical and had all the elements that you're looking for. But that factor, that murder through somebody who's supposed to be saving people, and suspicions 100 years later to have it confirmed that he was murdered with arsenic that was probably part of the doctor's medical supplies at the time. So he was poisoning him through the coffee first, and then told them not to let the captain throw up because they thought that might help out. Well, the doctor was like, no, that won't be good. We started giving him shots, and the shots were probably more, or included more, of the arsenic, which eventually killed him. Yeah. And that was the Polaris disaster that really there was hope in the U.S. that coming out of the Civil War, this was going to be an opportunity for people in the North and the South to gather around and show that the country was able to move forward with this amazing scientific and exploratory mission, and that the United States would be up there with all the other powers in the world and show that they can get to the North Pole. And it was a disaster. In that disaster, we have the beginnings of the next true disaster, the USS Jeanette, which will be in my next review, because that's what I'm hearing about now. Some of the people involved with that rescue were part of this rescue, or attempted rescue. It's all connected. That's it. Thanks for being here today. I will talk to you later. Have a good one.